Hello everyone, this is Karen Ladley, and my article to sum up for you is Collegiate Living and Cambridge Justice, Regulating the Colonial Harvard Student Community in the 18th Century. The article is really interesting and ties in beautifully with our text assignment for this week. So let's see, this is my first time using this Screencast software, so starting right into it, it seems to work great. The article addressed the New England Puritans, believing in consensual order, rule rising from within community and not outside of it. So basically talking about trying to keep the students in line. And so relying on the community was not unheard of. In fact, it was something they did quite regularly, however, not quite as involved as the colleges in Europe, in Britain, for example, but did ask town constables, justices of the peace, and county courts to help. The town and college worked together to ensure peace. Harvard disciplined its students, but relied on tutors, which were the early professors, in addition to magistrates and constables to investigate and monitor behavior. The collegiate community was basically the college and then the surrounding area, because initially there was not housing. The students lived within the community. So as I mentioned, Harvard was different than British universities. They wanted less to govern and control, but really to create a collegial community. Most of the early complaints were disturbing the peace. Students being kids, they were 14 through 17 largely initially. And so as the student numbers began to rise, as our text talked about, single digits to double digits to 50, 60 students, the complaints were just kids doing kind of rowdy things in the neighborhood, disturbing the peace. When there were complaints, the hands were not laid on the students, but the students were brought to the president and fellows of the college. Religion is huge in these early times, and of course speaking out was a huge no-no. For example, fines for missing prayers. The biggest and most severe penalty was missing Sunday service, and those students were fined 3 shillings. There was a case mentioned with Pierpont, who they went on for a little bit, sort of things going back and forth between a parochial school, I believe, and students getting in at Harvard. And so Pierpont was then condemning, reproaching, and insulting the government and the college by calling the Harvard fellows rogues, dugs, and tigers. Of course, the severe penalty he received was he was urged to issue an apology. He chose to not do so, turned to the courts, filing, there should be a space there, a civil suit. I thought this was interesting when Harvard tried to have college officials appointed to the Justice of the Peace position, so that students would be punished by not only offices of the local court, but in the double capacity they were serving, also officers of the college. So to me that seems like an early start to the whole college board process, the conduct board process. Since the community was basically largely the college and those supporting the college in different trades and so forth, by making the college officials also townspeople officials, it sort of seemed like everyone was kind of getting a foundational disciplinary basis instead of really having some involved law enforcement. And so it sort of seemed to me to be maybe the beginning of the conduct board. You may disagree. I thought the clear distinctions between punishments of the town and those imposed by the college were interesting. The college would demote your class rank, block the receiving of the degree for those who finished the program, and then of course for the most severe offenses suspend students, which would also prevent them from receiving their degree. Issues of ethics. There's a lot mentioned in this article about things that are not necessarily punishable by today's standards, things that probably go on college campuses to some degree pretty regularly, and the college really doesn't have anything to do with punishing people for these things, but back in these times, the issues of ethics, fathering a child out of wedlock, in the case mentioned in this article, the mother passed away out of complications with the pregnancy. There was some ethical violations in that the father of the child denied it initially and then later admitted to it. Cases of prostitution seem pretty rampant in those times. Drinking, and then the activities that ensue once one becomes a bit inebriated. And then gambling was just shocking. When you look at the other things that went on, to our standards, that might not be a big deal, but that seemed to be one of the bigger ethical issues of the time. And so Harvard tried to control students' actions to limit these temptations and opportunity to violate their strong ethical and moral code. And then the article mentions that leadership began to weaken during the years preceding the American Revolution, which one would expect if people were acting out. The article ties an issue where students went after an individual they were not friendly with to the Boston Tea Party and all the different rebellious acts that were going on at the time. Of course, one would think that would tie in with students doing other things that were not ethically and morally sound, given the sort of the temperament of the time. Some additional issues brought up towards the end of the article include commencement and peddlers, large numbers of pubs breaking out. I think it said one pub for 100 to 135 people, and scholarly pursuits becoming more of a social experience. So, tying that in with our text, it ties in beautifully. Religion and colonial ties to universities, subsidies, starting these universities out of money from the British government, and how these universities all seem to have a religious tie-in, and how they all seem to not be really happy when the Catholics and other faiths other than Anglican and Puritan and Protestant faiths, when other faiths sort of started coming into the area, in the areas of Maryland and some of the other colonies, it very much broke down and separated people. Reliance on heritage while politics and social environment was undergoing major changes. This is covered in our text. There's a lot of change going on, breaking away from Great Britain, and it's just interesting to see how the colleges were adapting during this time. Collegians were the sons of privilege. I often wondered how this course would tie in with white privilege and sort of how colleges have their roots in becoming more than a finishing school. A lot of these colleges seem to be sort of an extension of boarding school, a place for students to kind of grow up into men, and not so much study a particular area and become experts in that area. The text mentioned some instances where students received certificates or certifications, but they weren't authentically mastering a subject area. And so I found that really interesting. And then the article and the book talk about the 1800s, when tutors were becoming more specialized in specific subject matter, which is sort of the antithesis of what we were talking about initially, in that these tutors were sort of the early instructors, but they really weren't instructing so much in a particular area. So we're supposed to pose some questions, and of course I have a lot of them, not just one or two, so I'm hoping this is okay. My questions, suggestions would be, how have colleges like Harvard, Yale, the Early College of New Jersey, Rutgers, they mention, how have they survived and endured over time? Obviously, the purpose of these institutions and the way they market themselves is very different now. Very, very different now. What about the founding of these institutions of higher learning was already known to you? What was new information? I honestly did not know a lot about the colonial times and how these institutions became what they are, and how much transformation was involved there. The text mentions some theories about our part of the country. Why do you believe the South did not have colonial colleges established? What was it about the South? Obviously, there was a big port area with trade in Savannah and Charleston. So why were there not business programs or schools for the children of tradespeople or these big plantation owners. Why were their children all sent up north? Why did they not set up colleges in our colonies? I thought that was a really interesting question. Also, there was a brief mention about these Indian training programs for indigenous peoples in this country and what they were even intending to do with those programs when you look at what the colonial colleges were supposed to be. It was interesting. I mean, I guess the question should be, how could they have possibly have been successful? And I thought the mention of sending some of these rich sons of leaders in the country to Indian reservations being a more successful idea, really humorous, and probably very true. And then lastly, what was the purpose of allowing women to receive acknowledgments of their ability to attend college if they would not be allowed? So basically, it seems to me like it was acknowledged that women could possibly make it work, but yet we're not allowed to be given that chance to do so. So that's what I have. I hope I've done all that I'm supposed to do, and I look forward to all of your posts about this post, and look forward to responding. Thanks so much.